I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents. A look at growing up different and knowing what to do about it.
Because those who have a homosexual orientation have no control over that.
Plus, when it comes to money, we'll find out why enough is never enough. And looking back at memories made in Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland is in this time of transition. It's still a society trying to figure out its story.
Well, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. It's being called the toughest law of its kind in the country. Last week, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie signed the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights. The new law came more than 3 months after the suicide of Tyler Clementi, a Rutgers University student whose sexual encounter with another man was streamed on the internet. Clementi's death followed a string of suicides involving boys who were bullied because of their same-sex attraction. Well, here in Brooklyn, motivated in part by the Clementi suicide, St. Andrew the Apostle Parish in Bay Ridge recently held a screening of a film to address the bullying problem in its own backyard.
What we're doing today is we're viewing the short film Trevor. Trevor is a young man who struggles to come to grips with his gender identification, and through this struggle, which was enhanced by other people around him, he ultimately tries to commit suicide, and yet he doesn't succeed in doing that, and he comes to a positive identification of who he is, and he accepts himself.
Communities need to be aware of some of the problems that our kids are going through. We need to listen to what they're saying and then try to help them and let them know that they are safe, they are loved.
11 children a day from the age of 13 to 21 are committing suicide in this country, according to the Trevor Project.
We react to this issue in a way that percolates down to the children who commit suicide. What I'm trying to say is that we are responsible for these 9/11 deaths a day, societally, whether it be schools, whether it be families, whether it be church.
The church is teaching on homosexuality, objectively speaking, that this is a morally disordered lifestyle. That's the objective teaching of the Catholic Church.
If my kids told me they were gay, straight, or blue, it wouldn't matter to me because they're my kids. And I think that that's how the church should view it, because we're God's children.
Pastorally, we have to look at this from different perspectives, because those who have a homosexual orientation have no control over that. So as a result, those people are asked to strive to live as chastely as they possibly can, and are certainly welcome to the sacraments and to life in the church and to being very much part of congregations.
My hope is more that the individual families, communities, get the message into the schools to the kids that are at risk. We're going to watch out for you, we're going to take care of you. And I think in this case, it's going to be people leading the church.
My job is to work with you through whatever you're going through right now, and to try to enhance, here is the church's teaching, and here you are, but not necessarily to reject you, but to be with you and accompanying you in your spiritual journey.
Well, in that report, we saw how one parish responded to bullying, along with questions and concerns from those who attended the screening of the film Trevor. For more now on that film and the Catholic Church, how the Catholic Church exactly responds to these very issues, I spoke earlier today by phone with Father Paul Chek. He's the executive director of Courage. Courage is the church-approved apostolate that ministers to those with same-sex attraction. Well, Father Chek, thanks so much for joining us here today on Currents. We really appreciate your time, sir.
You're most welcome, Matt. A pleasure to be with you.
Well, I understand you've seen Trevor. And first of all, just want to get your reaction to the film.
Well, I have some reservations. I think that there are some good things that are there, and the emphasis on the importance between a young man and his relationship with his parents and his relationship with his friends and schoolmates, the question of self-discovery that all young people are going through at that time. That's treated, I think, in a useful way. I do have reservations about the presentation of the priest. Certainly that conversation that takes place in the car was most inappropriate and would certainly not be in keeping with any sound pastoral practice. But the church is very careful to want to distinguish three things: the person, the desire, and the action. The person, of course, is always a child of God and has a great dignity. And nothing that we do and nothing that we are changes that dignity as children of God. That is separate from a desire or an inclination to something which is contrary to our human good. And that is why the church characterizes the same-sex desire as objectively disordered. It doesn't mean the person is disordered. It means that the desire is not in keeping with our humanity. And the third distinction, of course, is action or activity, and that is where the church says that homosexual activity or actions are gravely at variance with the human good.
Right. So what should, from Courage's perspective, what should the proper Catholic response be to the issue of bullying, especially among those with same-sex attraction?
Sure. Well, one of great sensitivity, and therefore one that should be treated with delicacy and privacy. The choice of the Diana Ross tune coming out would suggest that there is something beneficial in bringing this conversation into a wide forum and very quickly. I think pastoral prudence would dictate, because of the very sensitive nature of this, to want to deal with it carefully and prudently. The parents, perhaps parish priest, perhaps a counselor, someone who is well versed in this question, rather than running the risk that someone will label themselves or be labeled by others according to their sexual inclination. We're much more complex and rich and noble, that we should not be reduced simply to one's sexual interest.
Right. So the focus of what Courage does then is really focusing on the person as a child of God, but then saying that these, the desires are not quite right, and then of course the actions, you want people to be celibate. Is that it, kind of in a nutshell?
Well, the virtue of chastity is one that's to be lived by all people according to their state in life, and so there's a coherence and consistency with regard to the Church's teaching in this way, because chastity is the virtue of freedom. And so in that sense, there's a chastity for married people, and there's a chastity for people who are not married. And that chastity, of course, is preparatory for self-giving and for self-fulfillment. Through the Courage apostolate, we do not make judgments quickly about how someone has arrived at this condition, because it's very complex and there's not one answer or solution as to why someone has this difficulty or challenge. Each person would be and should be treated uniquely as a child of God. And so there's great patience and understanding and compassion in the mind and heart of the Church for people who struggle with this. And there are great resources that are available to help them to understand themselves and to live a chaste life.
Well, we will, of course, link up folks on our website to some more resources offered by Courage. We'll do that over on our website, currentsny.net. Father Paul Chek, Executive Director of Courage, thank you so much for being here with us today on Currents. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Matt. God bless you.
Thanks. Well, stay with us. There's more Currents coming up. When we do come back, praying and remembering the victims of a shooting in Arizona this weekend. We'll have that story along with the rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Coming up later, a powerful look back at religious divide in Northern Ireland. But first, let's have a look at today's headlines. Well, prayer yesterday at a Catholic church in Tucson, Arizona, one day after a horrific shooting that left 6 people dead, 14 others injured, including Arizona Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. One of those killed, 9-year-old Christina Green, sang in the children's choir at St. Odilia's in Tucson. Green was born September 11, 2001, and was the granddaughter of former Yankees and Mets manager Dallas Green. Meanwhile, Congresswoman Giffords remains hospitalized with a serious head wound. Doctors say she is holding her own. The synagogue where she worships held a special healing service on Sunday morning. And the Knights of Columbus are remembering one of their own as well. District Court Judge John Roll was one of 6 people who died in that shooting. According to a statement from the Knights, Roll had just come from daily mass and had stopped to greet Giffords when he was shot. Meanwhile, the U.S. Bishops' Conference called for prayers and a greater respect for human life in the wake of the shooting. Well, from Rhode Island now, the Bishop of Providence, Thomas Tobin, says there's a frenetic rush to legalize same-sex marriage in his state. In a statement, Tobin affirmed the church's teaching that marriage between persons of the same sex is morally wrong, and he added that Rhode Islanders should have the opportunity to vote on the issue. Closer to home, ahead of the anniversary of the earthquake in Haiti, people took to the streets of Harlem on Saturday, outside the offices of former President Bill Clinton, the United Nations Special Envoy for Haiti. The protesters demand aid money to help Haiti recover.
No more deaths! No more deaths! No more deaths!
We are here today to really demand that President Clinton, the envoy of Haiti, representing the United States, the United Nations in Haiti, does his work.
And still, a year later, there's over 1.3 million people that are homeless, living in tents or makeshift housing. And at the same time, over $11 billion has been pledged to aid the people of Haiti.
People are still living outside, in the sewers, running outside with cholera, no water. Mr. Clinton, where is the money? Show us the money, Clinton. Show us the money. Where is the money? Upstairs, I don't know. Where is the money, Mr. President?
Basically, nothing has changed for the earthquake victims. And then add on top of that, the end of October, beginning of November, the country gets hit with cholera. Meanwhile, nobody really gives you a straight answer about the aid money. Where is it? How much of it has really come forth over the $11 billion that was pledged? And what money has come forth, where has it gone?
Most of the organizations that I've worked with, we want to work with the UN, and we want to work collectively. And I'm not really sure why that isn't happening. I do not know. I wish that they would tell us.
Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. What do we want? Housing! What do we want? Housing! When do we want it? Now! No more days! No more days! No more days!
We contacted Clinton's Harlem office, but they never responded to our request for an interview. Well, meanwhile, the State Department is protesting the Vietnamese government that after a diplomat was beaten for trying to visit an ailing Catholic priest who's under house arrest. A State Department spokesman says the diplomat, meanwhile, was up and walking around. The priest, Father Nguyen Van Lai, is a pro-democracy activist who was released from prison last year for medical reasons. In related news, Pope Benedict is demanding that governments around the world do more to protect Christians from violence and discrimination. The Pope said recent attacks in Egypt, Nigeria, and Iraq are another sign that action is needed. Benedict also said that Pakistan must overturn its blasphemy law. He condemned the murder of a Pakistani governor who favored abolishing that law. Well, stay tuned. There's much more currents ahead. Just ahead, a different perspective on overcoming money worries. Welcome back. Well, with the start of a new year, a lot of folks have made resolutions to turn a new page in life. Maybe, decrease the waistline, something like that. And sometimes that resolution, though, that page that they turn is a page in their checkbook. Especially now, concerns about money and budgeting often weigh heavily on Americans, but a new book seems to lift some of that burden. It's called Why Enough is Never Enough, and it offers a Catholic perspective on overcoming worries about money. Last week, I spoke with the author, Gregory S. Jeffrey. Greg, thanks so much for joining us here today on Currents. We really appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Well, no problem at all. Of course, this is a very timely topic. The subtitle of your book, Overcoming Worries About Money, a Catholic Perspective. I think it's something that speaks to a lot of people because in this economy, a lot of people are worrying about money. What was your inspiration to write this book?
Well, actually, I've been working with Catholic schools and parishes for 20 years doing fundraising, and in the course of the 20 years, I had the opportunity to visit with, almost 4,000 people to ask for major gift support. And what I discovered, Matt, was it's not just a poor economy in which a lot of Catholics or a lot of people, worry about money. It's something that is endemic in every economy I've discovered. And it's also not just something that is limited to those who live paycheck to paycheck. It's also, I discovered in visiting with people and asking their support for, major causes, major Catholic causes, that even people with a lot of money worry about money. And so I asked the question, why is that, and what can we do about it from a spiritual perspective?
Yeah, well, I remember being a little bit younger and, saying to myself, oh, if I could only make X amount of dollars a year, I'd be fine. And then, you get to a point where you're making that money that you said is your goal, and you're like, okay, well, that's not really enough. So if I make this amount more, then that's fine. So that kind of goes back to, why enough is never enough. And the title of the book, why is enough never enough?
The title of the book, Why Enough is Never Enough, really stems from an experience I had about 20 years ago. I went to ask somebody for $100,000 for their daughter's Catholic secondary school, and he made the gift, but then he leaned forward and he looked at me with a very serious face and said, but if my wife finds out, you guys aren't going to get a dime. And I kind of had this puzzled look on my face, like, well, why is that? And then he went on to explain that with a certain amount of resignation that he said this quote, my wife doesn't understand that we have enough money to last several lifetimes, but she still worries about money. And so that was what started me thinking about what do we have to do spiritually to overcome money. And that's the title of the book, Why Enough is Never Enough. There is no amount of money, this is the premise of my book, there's no amount of money that can overcome those persistent anxieties about the material goods that we must have daily. There's no amount of money that can overcome that fear. Yeah. There's only a conversion in a certain part of our hearts that can overcome that kind of ongoing anxiety.
Right. Well, and you see it even in this economy, as we were saying earlier. I mean, a lot of the reality shows that are pretty popular now are these hoarding reality shows, where they'll go into people's homes where they've just accumulated so much stuff over the years. And a lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, well, I do retail therapy. They buy stuff that they don't really need, and it takes over their lives and it takes over their homes. So that would be sort of, I guess, symptoms of someone not being happy with their situation to an extreme. But what are some people, maybe the average person can look to as symptoms of them not being happy with their financial situation?
Well, if I could put a little bit different spin on the question.
Sure.
One of the things I address in the book is people who aren't at peace with money. And like this gentleman that I've just described, or his wife, I should say, people who aren't at peace with money. Because I've dealt with so many people and they're in intimate conversations about money over so many years, I kind of come to understand that some people are at peace with money. When you're at peace with money, you don't worry whether or not you have it or not. Other people aren't at peace. And one of the things that I see among people that aren't at peace with money is, for example, there's a real predisposition to compare one's financial status with others. In other words, even though we may be making a modest living and have food on the table and a roof over our head, there's still this predisposition to compare our financial status with others. There's like this, we worry that somebody else is making more than us.
Yeah, it's
so
like,
why would that be?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's it goes back to, I guess, a large part of human nature and being in competition with others, and and I guess maybe regardless of the economy, those worries are there. But I guess maybe in this situation, it kind of makes it worse.
It does. It does.
Well, Gregory Jeffrey, author of Why Enough is Never Enough, book available now, and we'll post more information about it and where you can get it online and hopefully become at peace with money, or at least head down that road after reading it. Gregory, thank you so much for being here on Currents. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks. Very interesting and timely conversation. Well, stay where you are. There's much more current still to come. When we return, a fresh look at a decades-old conflict.
Northern Ireland is in this time of transition. It's still a society trying to figure out its story.
Well, finally tonight, a remarkable glimpse at a troubling period of recent history, the conflict between Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland. Queen's College recently hosted Voices Envisioned, Memories Made in Northern Ireland. It's a project using storytelling and visual arts to try and better understand the religious divide in Ireland. More importantly, it was also created to encourage dialogue and, as the exhibit put it, explore peace and conflict resolution. Well, the result, as you're about to see, was unique and powerful.
This exhibition is the artwork that came out of my fieldwork project in Northern Ireland. An opportunity to bring my interest in art and museums together with my interest in peace and conflict education. Northern Ireland is in this time of transition. It's still a society trying to figure out its story. In a very short period of time, they have come a long way. And when people say, oh, but you know the troubles and the violence, and isn't it still? And I'm like, well, let's see. In that same 40 years, we went from Martin Luther King to electing Barack Obama president. So what makes us so special that somebody else can't have that kind of monumental societal change in 40 years? There are young people growing up now who have never experienced direct violence, and so have grown up in a very different Northern Ireland than their grandparents' generation and even their parents' generation. A lot of families with the best of intentions think that if they don't talk to their children about what they experienced, they won't inherit the sectarianism, that religious intolerance that they grew up with. If they do hear the stories, they only hear the stories from one community, one religious community, only the Catholic story, or only the Protestant story. So the group that I ended up working with, not only was I bringing together Protestants and Catholics, also of different generations. The storytelling was both ways. Everybody heard each other's stories. The young people needed to hear those stories. And the older people needed to hear what the young people's lives were like. The young people were taking the oral histories, the stories that they heard, and visually interpreting them.
I think there's something very experiential that happens when you ask people to assign symbols to their experiences. And when you're asking one group to assign symbols to another experience, you can definitely see sort of the value that could have emotionally.
Nuala, who's Catholic, partnered with Norma, a social worker, in Portadown during the Troubles. Norma's job as a Protestant working for the state was to go into Catholic homes for the people who lived in what they call the housing estates, what we would call the projects, and evaluate these people. Norma was very aware of this tension around her going into these homes uninvited. Yet, these women always offered her a cup of tea in a china cup. So they turned around that whole relationship purely by giving her the tea in a cup. Nuala takes this one step further. So she went out to charity shops, secondhand shops, and she bought these cups and she broke them. She made them dirty and she broke them and she put them back together with Band-Aids, with wire, with tape, with string, in some cases with glue. And she wanted to look at the fragility as well as the resilience of people coming out of this period, out of this trauma, out of any trauma. But she was also looking at the idea of an heirloom. We pass on valuable things, but we also pass on not so great things like sectarianism, like bias, racism, religious intolerance. And so she's looking at all of these things with these cups, and it came out of a story that Norma told her.
Here at CUNY, it's very important that we reach as many diverse audiences as we possibly can. I think that's the role of art. And as a curator, I think it's extremely important to seek out exhibitions and people and places and art that really kind of changes the way that people see things. That it's even more important for people and artists and writers, everyone to kind of reach out and say, what can I do to make this the world that I want to live in?
Fascinating stuff. Well, that is it for tonight. Now, coming up tomorrow, I'll take you to an ecumenical pro-life gathering featuring one of the most prominent leaders of that movement and someone who's actually been a guest on the show here before, Alveda King. In the meantime, though, remember, we're always online over at currentsny.net. You can also follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. Until next time, I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great night.